All right, guys, welcome to this video. This is something that I've had on my mind for a long time, but something that I just kept thinking about and thinking about and thinking about. And I literally got to the point where I was losing sleep over this topic, laying in bed at night till 1, 2, 3 in the morning, just thinking about this whole topic and whole situation that we're in the fishing world right now. And specifically, I want to talk about the musky world, but talk about a lot of things that kind of cross over with it. Some things that we've learned. There's a lot of unknowns with this. This isn't me trying to come at anybody specifically. This isn't me saying you should do, you should be doing this or shouldn't be doing that. I'm not telling you how to fish. I'm not telling you what to do. I basically just want to start to have a conversation, a civil conversation, and just start talking about it, because I think this topic is so controversial. It's worse than politics, in my opinion. It's something that I'm even hesitant to talk about. Right? I'm a business owner. I have some sort of place in the musky industry, and it's scary to me to wonder what even me talking about this topic could do to my name or my reputation or something. I've worked really hard to get to where I'm at, but it's something that I just need to get off my chest. I feel like before going into this season, I want to get some things out there, and like I said, I just want to have a conversation about it and get other people talking about it, because I think people are scared to talk about it. And this, like I said, this should be civil. That I don't want any hate in the comments one way or the other towards me or towards anyone else in this video or in the comments section, I should say. But I just want to start to have this conversation. It's topics we need to talk about, and we need to think about, and we need to be realistic with things as well. I think a lot of people are very biased either one way or the other, and there's really no middle ground. I would say I'm very much so in the middle with this technology and where things are at. I know if I had to choose one, I know which side I would personally be on, but it's not up to me. We had a crazy little flare up in Wisconsin this year where we were able to vote on making 360 and forward-facing technologies illegal. If you guys were interested in that at all, you could go and vote. I know I went to the meeting. I sat there for 3 hours during the spring hearing, listened to every single word they had to say. I voted my way on my piece of paper, and I didn't try and convince anyone else in the room to do anything else. I was just there. Me and my wife both went. We sat there through it all, listened to everything, and I just put my stuff down to paper. I wasn't there to try and start any controversy, but it's just something I want to talk about. And the main thing that really spiked my interest in this, and something that really got when I really started losing sleep over this topic, is when the Aaron Weeb video came out this winter about barotrauma with crappies. And it was super interesting to me. And this video was something that was obviously we learned a lot from. This was something, I think this started a lot of conversation. I think this was really good for the crappie fishing world, or maybe even for the panfish world, but it also moves over into other fish species, right? So the interesting thing about it is that there was 2 videos that he did on. If you guys haven't watched them, you need to go watch them. They're very, very interesting. There's a lot of good information in them. It kind of debunks some theories to a point. Aaron has some new theories to a point. I have nothing but respect for Aaron. I think he's done a great job. He's the one creator, I would say, that if something is posted, I drop what I'm doing and I go watch and see what Aaron has to say. He's super intelligent, super interesting human, and has done a lot for the fishing industry as well. But I think with this, we just need to talk more about it in the musky side of things, because we have a different fish. We have a fish that is very rare, very low density, very fragile, which is, I think, something that a lot of people don't realize from the outside looking in. Non-musky anglers say now that we have this technology at our fingertips. You have to know how to use the technology for sure, and you have to understand it, but no one can argue that this doesn't make it easier. 100% makes it easier, right? Is it a little bit easier or a lot of bit easier? Depends where you're at, time of year, all the other things. There's a lot of factors that go in there, but anyone says it doesn't make it easier, it's new technology. That's what it's there for. That's what it's meant to do. If you look at the bass world, it's taken over the majority of the bass tournaments, which is our highest level of fishing. Guys that are really, really good and understand like their electronics and the game, and are just really good fishermen, whether they're like a John Cox that stays on the bank, or if there's someone that is offshore with forward facing and is doing the forward facing game. So there's so much interesting stuff to this, but the thing that really piqued my interest the most, and Aaron did a really good job, I think, trying to push the envelope in what we need to do as far as studies. I know he had some issues with a study that was done in Minnesota. And I know the people on the other side of that study that he was kind of debunking their theory on things. And then there was Aaron's theory, and what that video that Aaron made, those two videos he made, pushed this other group to redo their study, right? So it's not released yet, but I do have a good friend of mine who's on or was a part of it, and they redid their study, and they did it much more thorough. They did it with the DNR. They did it with even a lot more technology than what was used in Aaron's video. They did it in a controlled lake, in a private lake with same species crappies. And once that comes out, I don't want to spoil or talk about it too much, just that's their information to give out, but it is going to open a lot of people's eyes, hopefully, and maybe change our theories on things once again. I will say that in Aaron's video, he did show a lot of the fish going back down to their desired depth, but I will say if you hold them in a controlled environment, which they were able to do with the DNR, these fish do end up struggling quite a bit if you are pulling them out of very deep sections of water. Now, the interesting part with this, and the biggest problem I had with this, because Aaron said right away in the beginning of his video, if you want to do this the right way, you don't go and fish deep, essentially. If you just want to go out there, catch your limit of fish and go home and not catch any more, that's fine, right? If you're scared about doing this or worried about hurting the fish, don't go and fish for these suspended fish. Now, the interesting part with this was, so, that was kind of his, way to get out of this. And then he went out and put it into, I'm going to show you guys what these fish are capable of doing. It was basically catching these fish in a scenario that was 34 to 36 feet deep, them coming up, quickly releasing the fish goes back down to the bottom. The problem was, like I say, that with this is that crappies, in my mind, are almost like, I don't want to call them a lab rat or, a fish that doesn't matter, but it's a crappie, right? I feel like it's very, can withstand a lot of stress. It can take a lot more than, say, a big giant muskie. Now, the interesting part about Aaron's videos too is the majority of the big fish that he caught ended up struggling, regardless if it took them a little bit longer to get down. The second video he did where he put him in the tank, he had one of the larger fish that actually died. So to me, I think our muskies are a lot more fragile than what a general crappie would be in my sense, or thought, due to the practice, like just dealing with them all the time, right? Like I have hundreds of muskies in my boat a year, and you have to do so many things right in order to get a lot of good releases. If you haven't had a muskie die on you, you haven't caught a whole lot of muskies, I will say that. It's something that happens, it's part of the game. I understand we're stuffing, big giant metal hooks into these fish. They've got barbs. There's all kinds of things that go against giving these fish a chance, but there are things we can do that gives these fish maybe a better chance. And that's where we're going to come into more of the discussion with forward facing and how it's used, because I don't think it's going away. I don't think it's possible at this point for it to go away. Too many anglers have it. There's too much money in it. There's too much money behind it. And it's something that we have to be very careful with. And something that Aaron stated in his video too, is that you don't want someone coming from outside of the fishing world to determine, what you can or can't do in a fishing scenario, that being the government. I said this is it gets so political at a point, but they're public fishery. They're public lakes, right? Like no one owns any water. These are all public bodies of water. So there's a lot of respect, and I think a lot of accountability you have to hold yourself to if you are going to use this technology. Now, I'll be the first to say it. I originally, when this technology came out, I was very much so against it. I didn't like it. I voiced my opinion about it. Since that was 4 or 5 years ago. Since then, I've come to terms more with it, I will say. I still think it's a very powerful tool. It's something that can be definitely do a lot of harm to a lot of fisheries. And like I say, there is a sense of responsibility, I think, that comes with this technology. I was very curious in the whole open water sharpshooting muskie deal. I went into someone's boat, I watched it, I sat there for 2 days and I watched it. I sat in the passenger seat, I watched a couple fish get caught. I watched a lot of fish that didn't bite. This isn't something that makes fish bite, but I watched, and it was exactly kind of what I thought it was going into it. And just from talking to other friends and people that use it or had been around it, it's exactly what I thought it was. I've seen it on all three of the different electronics companies that matters. I've seen it on all three. They're all incredibly powerful. They all have, you know, the means and the ability to do this kind of fishing. And the one thing it's going to come down to, like I said, is responsibility. I think is the biggest thing. If you go out and have this technology at your fingertips, it's going to be no different than, you know, not fishing if you have a certain limit on water temperature, right? You always hear about the 80-degree water temperature, not targeting fish after 80 degrees. It's no different than not targeting fish out of season, right? If you're seeing fish that are, while you're bass fishing or walleye fishing and musky season isn't open, it's not targeting those fish out of season. There's no difference with that. There's no difference in seeing a big giant fish that you can't get to bite and not throwing a treble hook over its back and snagging the fish, right? It all comes down to just how you are going to be willing to respect the resource and how you are going to be able to police yourself and making sure that you're making good decisions and decisions that aren't going to hurt the fish, because you might have all this money invested. You might have $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in some people's boats worth of this technology, but that doesn't give you the right to, you know, go after or, you know, hurt fish that are a public resource that are there for everyone. I think there's a lot of things. I mean, this conversation can go into fish handling. It could go into licenses, a lot of different things. I'm going to try and keep it on forward facing as much as possible, but the responsibility factor comes into this. And I think the one thing we need to understand or want to push the envelope and start to get a conversation going is barotrauma with muskies. And where is there a certain threshold? I know I talked to a lot of anglers that do the forward facing stuff. Some people have a 15-foot threshold. Some people have an 18-foot threshold. Some people have no threshold. And to me personally, I think that's very irresponsible. I think barotrauma is obviously a very real thing. We've seen it in plenty of other fish. I've even personally seen it in fish that can supposedly control their air bladders, right? Lake trout are something that I fish a lot for. Just in the last week, I had a lake trout that I caught that was blown up like a balloon, and it was an air bladder. And you know, these fish can burp and they can supposedly control their swim bladders. But this fish blew up and I couldn't get it to release. It would not go down. It was just like a float. It would kick down 5-6 feet and it would float right back up to the surface. Now, the person I was fishing with had a Ffs needle. We were able to stick the needle in the fish, get some of the air out. One of the fish did release. Out of the two fish that we had blow up with barotrauma, one of the fish did release and we lost sight of it. It went down. Did it stay down? How is that fish doing today? I have no idea. The other fish, we fizzed and we could still not get the fish to go down. So there is a fish that can supposedly control its air bladder, yet a fish that was not able to withstand being caught out of deeper water, right? And being released. So it's very interesting with muskies. Now, the other crazy thing that comes into play, and something that we know is something with muskie releasing, is water temperature. And water temperature is something that is something we need to be very cautious of. Obviously, as muskie anglers, we have generally that 80-degree threshold. Right now, we need to start to think about, okay, if we're going to be targeting these fish, generally the primary, I would say, time of year to fish for these open water fish is post-spawn, after these fish are stressed out from spawning. They just went through an incredibly stressful time, and now they're out in the open water. Water temperatures are warming. Maybe they're in the high 60s, low 70s. And maybe even upper 70s if we have a warmer spring. I mean, some of these lakes now we're seeing the muskies are spending more time out in open water. Is that due to fishing pressure? Is that due to forage? I'm not exactly sure. It depends on the lake. But it's very interesting to think about. And the crazy thing is that I've been someone who has fished open water muskies since 2015, I believe, is when I started on Lake Vermilion. This was pre-forward facing. You would go out, you would cast around the basin, you'd catch some fish. And it was crazy that all these fish were out there. And the more we learn about them, the crazy thing is that how much time the fish are actually spending out there. So in places where I think it's most predominant to have this open water bite is Minnesota, right? This is where the whole forward facing deal started, was on Lake Vermilion. This is where, a lot of these fish seem to spend a lot of their time, whether it's the Leech Lake strain of muskies or just those specific lakes, or why it is that those fish spend that much time out there. I'm not sure. It's definitely something that fish in northern Wisconsin do. That was proven by a PMTT tournament that was won with forward-facing sonar in the open water. So like, there's plenty of other strains of muskies that do this. If you look at a lake like St. Clair lines up perfect for an open water, somewhat musky factory. There's a ton of fish in it. It's a big giant bowl for the majority of it. They definitely have fish up in the weeds, but a lot of times they're fishing this deeper grass that's in 16, 18, 20, 22 feet of water. So it's interesting how these different lakes are lining up to be fished a specific way. But we just need to hold ourselves accountable, I think, with this technology. It's something that I learned so much from personally. And I probably should have mentioned this earlier in the video, because I'm sure I'm already getting slammed in the comments for this. I have used forward facing for muskies. I used it last fall for jigging. It was super fun. I enjoyed it. I used it for casting as well while we were casting. I specifically had used it last year on structure, whether we were casting structure or deep rocks, or shallow rock reefs, whatever, and then jigging at the same time. I learned so much about muskies, and it was so interesting to see all this stuff and to learn all this stuff. And this is where my mind continued to spin about this whole topic. I'll share a story with you here quick that was absolutely crazy to me, and kind of going into what I want to get at with all of this. But a story that was wild to me is I was on Lake of the Woods last fall, and I was fishing, and I had a friend at the front of the boat, and I watched them retrieving in a smaller bulldog. And this fish, or this bait I should say, was coming in. The boat was in 22, 24 feet of water, something like that, maybe 25 feet of water. And we were casting to shore. It was a rock point. There was a depression off the end of it. There was walleye sitting out in the depression. It's just the spot that we had started to figure out this is where the muskies were sitting. But as I'm watching his bait come in, I have my forward facing, and down in the back corner, I've got it angled and forward, kind of pointing towards the front of the boat so I can see anything that comes through the cone angle. And I see his bulldog coming through the water, and it's only 4 feet under the surface, right? And it's only 20 feet from the boat. The bait is very, very, very high. We're on Lake of the Woods and around the northwest angle. There's very limited water clarity. I'd say we're at maybe 2 feet, 2.5 at the very most as far as clarity. So very, very dirty water. It was a very natural colored bulldog. Nothing super bright or anything like that. And I watched all of a sudden a little blip come off of the bottom 22 feet down and come flying up about 16, 18 feet and eat my friend's lure. And it was absolutely crazy to me that a fish could see and or probably more so feel a lure that is that far above its head, to me, and put that fish in a position where, now starting to understand that, what about our clear lakes? How deep are these fish coming from if you have a lake that's incredibly clear, where you have a 15 or 20 foot water clarity, versus a dirty, stingy Lake of the Woods where a fish can come up 16 to 18 feet to eat a lure, right? So that part was absolutely wild to me, and really started to make the wheels spin and started to make more things in my head really wonder about, more of this open water fishing that we do. Now, like I said, I learned so much from forward facing this last fall with casting with it and trolling with it, or I should say not trolling, jigging with it. And it was incredibly interesting to me. And the more I watched it this fall, the more that I learned. And going into this next season, something that doesn't sit well with me personally, and something that I've told people to go and do. I have suggested this to people. I have, told people about it and suggested to go and fish this way and do this stuff. And that is fishing open water. Where I go and personally do it is in Minnesota. The thing that really kind of started to bug me is that understanding that a fish that could now see, say, 16, 18 feet in a dirty, stingy water scenario, and take that into a clean water scenario where I fish in Minnesota, is how deep are these fish coming from? That, we're out in the basin. I've never personally on my boat used forward facing casting for muskies open water in Minnesota, or drove around in sharp shot. Like I've never done that out of my personal boat. Like I said, I jumped in someone else's boat, I watched it happen, but I personally haven't had it in my boat. Now, the crazy thing to me, or what got my wheels turning, is I understand there has to be a certain limit or depth where these fish are going to be struggling when they come up from certain depths. Now, I started to realize this, I believe, more so with trolling open water. I used to troll open water a lot. I think I quit 3 years ago is the last time I trolled open water. due to the fact that trolling in open water, you have a bait that you're putting back. So maybe it's 5 feet under the surface, maybe it's 10 feet under the surface. But I know there's a lot of people that'll run baits that are 15 or 20 feet down. And I started to run into fish that I couldn't get to release very well. And this was specifically on Leech Lake patrolling the Paris Trench. This was something that I really had a hard time getting fish to release. I would say 1 out of 5 would release really well, like put them back in the water within 5 seconds, they're gone. And especially the bigger ones are the ones that I had trouble with. So I started to realize this and like, man, this, even though my baits are only 5-10 feet down, I didn't know where these fish were coming from. And I started to kind of put the pieces together and make, man, all the fish I was seeing on, say, a 2D sonar, if I would just happen to drive right over top of them, seemed to be more like that 22 feet deep or deeper. And then even inside imaging, it was very rare to see some of your fish up super high. I know trolling one time in Walker Bay, I was trolling open water, and I had a down rod with a matlock 5 feet back behind the boat, right? So I got a 7.5 foot rod on a down rod, 5 feet of line off the tip, and then a 5 foot leader. So 10 feet of line out. So say that bait on a shallow pin. So say that bait at most is 2 feet down off the lead, and then the rod was probably 3 feet north. So maybe the bait is 5 feet down in that sense. I drove over a fish, I marked the fish on 2D, and as soon as I marked the fish, the rod went off, and the mark was in 20 feet of water. So that fish instantly shot up 15 feet, which isn't that far to think about, guys. I mean, if you fish a 10-foot rod, if you double the length of your rod, that's all a fish has to swim up. That's one kick of a tail. We can see how fast and crazy these fish are. That fish released fine from what I remember. But regardless, it just went, again, it was another piece in the mind. It's like, wow, these fish are coming from depths that we're not really sure. We don't know where they're coming from. So one thing that I guess going into this season, this is the Friday before Northern Wisconsin Muskie opener. I planned on filming this video a few days ago, and I just kept pushing it off. I didn't know how to talk about it, what to talk about, if I should even do it, just due to the fact they said there's so much drama around this topic. But one thing that I guess kind of changed in my personal schedule for the season, generally I fish Green Bay for our opener. I'll go to Minnesota for about 2 weeks and do the open water casting deal. And then I'll go up into Lake of the Woods and do my deal up there. But one thing that I'm really struggling with is I don't feel right personally going back to Minnesota and casting in open water the way that I've been doing it, specifically due to the fact that you don't know where your fish are coming from if you're not using forward-facing sonar. And that's the scary thing. Now, this is where the responsibility factor comes into play, is that we're going to have to understand or start, respect the fish enough to, I think personally, in my opinion, I'm not telling you what to do, what I'm not going to do. I don't feel right going out into the open water and aimlessly casting around in the basins like I've used to do without forward-facing sonar. This is something I don't want to make a cast at a fish, or I should say, I don't want to make a cast not knowing if there's a fish around or if a fish is at a certain depth that I don't want the fish to come up from in order to eat a lure. Okay, I'm sure these fish do this all the time when they're feeding naturally on Cisco's or other bait fish. I understand that. I'm sure those fish are able to regulate that a lot better. They're probably not worried about regulating their air bladder when they have a 8/0 treble hook in the side of their face and you're dragging them in with a 25 pounds of drag on your reel, right? So I understand there's plenty of other things we do as musky anglers that put these fish in harm or danger. I'm just saying that if there's something that is as simple as either not going out into the open water and targeting these fish, and or if you are going to go out there, or if I'm going to go out there, I'm going to want to be using forward-facing sonar so that I can see that, okay, here's a fish at 20 feet of water. I don't want to cast at that fish because I don't want to risk that fish getting barotrauma, right? Here's a fish 10 feet under the surface. We should be able to cast at that fish 10 feet, caught up hundreds of fish out of 10 feet of water. I've never had any barotrauma come up with those fish. So what I really want to push the envelope on is finding out or seeing if we can get some kind of study done or research done to see where is the certain threshold with these fish as far as what depth they're able to withstand getting caught out of. I'm sure water temperature is going to have a play in that. I'm sure a certain strain of muskie, one or the other, is going to have a play in that. There's so many unknown variables to the whole topic and everything that goes along with it that I'm very curious to know more about. And it's something that I know I need help from maybe anglers that are much more, you know, relatively familiar with forward facing. Maybe this is a DNR study. Maybe we just need to work together as a muskie community to figure this out. But it's something that I'm personally struggling with. I know I've kind of changed my season around as far as, you know, where I'm going to be, what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do it for this specific season, and if I'm imagining going forward, just due to my kind of thoughts and feelings on this topic. Now, I will say that the interesting thing, or like what I'm really challenging myself with, is okay, if we have a limit of 20 feet of water, um, is that, you know, is the water temperature going to come into play with that, right? So what about when we're fishing muskies in the fall and these fish are sliding deeper? They're now on, they're potentially on structure. At least when I fish for them in the fall, they're on structure, and a fish is in 18 or 20 or 22 feet of water. What happens if your boat is positioned in 40 feet of water, right? And you're casting to your structure, and like, do you give the fish the opportunity to even bite your lure in that scenario? Like, do we need to put our boats in the depth, like the set depth that we don't want these fish to come out of any deeper than that, right? So say it's 18 feet. Well, then you shouldn't in reality be running your boat any deeper than 18 feet of water. Now, in the fall, is this different because now we have colder water versus in the summer we have warmer water, right? The fall releases with muskies are absolutely awesome. You put them back in the water, you don't even have to hold their tail 90% of the time. You just put them in the water, they're upright and they're gone, right? But it's really interesting. Some of the fish we caught jigging this last year would even come into the net, and you kind of hear them start like almost burping or groaning, and it's like, well, where did this fish come from, right? Like, I can see that my boat's in 20 feet of water and my tube was at 15 feet and this fish ate the bait. Where is the threshold, or where's the number and depth that these fish can withstand it? Now, the problem with the forward facing stuff is that you can't hold other anglers accountable to it nearly as much, due to the fact it's not like a water temperature thing or a fishing out of season thing, where you can literally look at your graph and see it's 84 degrees and there's someone right here casting for muskies, or it's the week before muskie opener and you see someone figure eighting a bucktail right up on a shallow flat. The difference is that now, unless you're staring at their screen or you're also looking at the same fish with a forward-facing sonar, you can't tell how deep the fish are that they're casting at. So this is where the self-policing is going to come into, and just the respect for the other anglers, and more so the fish, right? I'm more so worried about the fish, and I'm worried about if we as humans are going to be able to control ourselves when you have, say, 10, 15, $20,000 invested into this technology. You just went on a 3-day long trip, and all of a sudden it's Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock. You haven't caught a fish all week, and all of a sudden you mark a big giant fish at 22 feet of water. What is that person going to do, right? That's the hard part. That's going to be the part where it's going to be really hard to hold back from casting at that fish. I would think personally, if that was someone in their shoes, right? So it's going to come down to responsibility, ethics, morals. All that stuff is going to come into play, because nobody owns these fish. These are public fish. These are fish that are open to anyone that wants to buy a fishing license and fish for them and target them. But you need to have the respect for the resource and the fish, more so than maybe getting your catch or your picture or this or that. I mean, there's so many other things that come into play with this, as far as like social media. And I mean, this topic is just, it's huge. It's so giant and massive. I mean, I didn't even get into any fish handling stuff yet, because there's definitely things that us as anglers can do better with fish handling. I think that are very simple things to do. So it's very hard and a very interesting topic for me. Like I said, and something that I could ramble on here for hours for. But I just want to just talk, get the conversation started. I'm not one side or the other. I'm very much so in the middle. I understand the technology. I think it's super cool. I've learned a ton from it, but I think it comes with a big risk as far as ethics and morals and what people are going to do with it. And I'm worried about musky anglers for sure, and people that are going to abuse it. But I'm also just as much, if not more so, worried about non-musky anglers, people now that can, be out jigging for walleyes or sharp shooting walleyes, and all of a sudden they see a big giant muskie on live scope or a big giant mark, and maybe they have one rod in the boat specifically after they've been seeing all these big giant fish on their screens for weeks and weeks, and I've never had an opportunity to catch them. Now they just went to Cabela's the other day, bought an 8-foot extra heavy rod and some reel, and all this other stuff, not really understanding the fish or understanding the equipment, and then just throw a big bulldog or a tube or whatever it is at the fish, and they catch a fish out of a very deep scenario, right? Out of a very deep water scenario, maybe it's plus 20 feet, whatever it is. And then now they're handling these fish, they're catching more of these fish because it is easier to do so now with forward-facing sonar. So I'm just as much worried about the non-musky anglers that are now being able to see these fish, see that they're there, and specifically, maybe have another rod and cast it and catch these fish. Now, walleye anglers have been catching muskies since the beginning of time, right? That's just part of it. That's what happens. But they've never intentionally or had the ability to target them and be this effective with it, is what I'm personally really concerned about as well. Now, I don't want us as a muskie group to go after, a pan fisherman or a walleye fisherman or bass fisherman, but I want us to just, police ourselves, police your friends, try and keep everyone kind of in check and make sure that you're doing what's best for the fish versus what's best for your personal gain. I think is very, 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 very important. All right, one thing I want to kind of get back and touch on is to just some of the comparisons between the crappie video that Aaron did and then our muskies in general. I have a couple notes here, but one of the things I want to talk about is just understanding and making sure that we understand, even in this study that Aaron did with the crappies, which in my personal opinion is the best study that's been done so far, showcasing barotrauma and what these fish can withstand, and using the forward facing to start to understand what these fish are doing more so, or how they can handle it or not handle it. But they was also dealing with basically 33-degree water, right? These fish are in a very cold water scenario where we talked about earlier. Cold water scenario, fish generally do a lot better. If you watch any bass tournament or walleye tournaments, you'll see a lot of guys are always carrying bags of ice in them to put in the live well to try and cool that live well temperature down for their fish so that they're not going to get a penalty for a dead fish in their live well towards the end of the day. Now, with the crappie video, it was awesome to see how Aaron had kind of figured out to bring these crappies up, grab them, you keep them out of the water for as limited amount of time as possible, put the fish back in the water, squeeze the belly to get the air bubbles out, keep the fish underwater in that whole time, close the fish's mouth, turn the fish, and then push the fish down the hole. This was all fine and dandy and looks great. I did a little bit of crappie fishing this last fall on Lake of the Woods, and we were catching some fish out of that same general area depth of water, anywhere from 24 to say 34 feet of water suspended. And I continued to do this whole method, and I would say personally, out of all the people that I fish with, like, my hands are really good. My hands stay very warm. I don't have a lot of issues with my hands in the cold. My feet are absolutely horrible, but my hands are really, really good. And my hands were absolutely frozen out here, even on a day that was, I don't go ice fishing if it's not above zero, but on a very general, winter day, maybe it was 15 degrees, light wind, whatever. And I just started to realize, like, man, this is hard to do. And then you get guys that get in a school of crappies, and in order to kind of keep the school fired up, and it's no different than bass fishing or smallmouth fishing, you start piling fish on the ice so you can get down there, get another fish out of the pod. And then you put 8 fish in the ice, and then you release them all if you care to at the end when you're done beating up on the school. And it's just crazy to me, like, how the mentality of all this stuff kind of goes with different kinds of angling and everything else. Like I say again, like, this study was done with crappies, and I think crappies are a really cool fish, but I also think that they're a lab rat compared to a muskie in my opinion. There's just something different about a big giant fish that's maybe 15, 20, 25 years old as a muskie, right? I think that's a lot different. Now, a couple other interesting questions that I have is, like, as muskie anglers, we've been taught to scoop the fish, get the fish in the net, keep the fish in the net, in the water, let it sit next to the boat while we get all of our stuff ready. That's all fine and dandy. But I don't know if we need to have more of an urgency in sense to get that fish, if you want to take pictures of that fish or whatever you want to do with it, to get that fish out of the net as fast as possible and back to swimming, because how long is that fish up at an undesired depth, right? That fish came from a certain depth. Maybe it was 5 feet, maybe it was 15 feet, maybe it was 25 feet. If we're keeping that fish on the surface at really its undesired depth, the only reason it's there is because you caught it and it's sitting in the net, how much urgency do we have to have in order to get our stuff done or whatever we want to get done with the fish, and then get the fish released back to wherever it wants to go, right? That's a very interesting question, or something that I'd like to know more about personally. I know myself personally, what I do with the fish that I catch myself, what I do is scoop the fish. Generally, I'll put the fish in the net 99% of the time, unless if it's hooked, in a really nice spot where I can just lean over and pop it out. Generally, I get the fish in a controlled circumstance in the net so that I can unhook them. If it's not a fish that I want to take a picture with, I'll just dip the net down, let the fish swim out of the net. If it is a fish that I want to get a picture with, I can pull the fish out, I'll get a quick picture of the fish, and then release the fish. Personally, for myself, I don't measure a fish that I think is not, between that 48 to 50 inch mark, right? 50 inches is the benchmark for our trophy fish. I don't need to measure a 44 incher. If I can look in a net and say, okay, that fish is 44 inches. I've been lucky enough to fish a long time or fish for a living, catch a lot of those size fish. I don't need to measure that fish. Maybe it's got really cool markings. Maybe I'll take a picture with it. Maybe I'll just let the fish go. But I have a certain benchmark for myself of the size that fish that I want to do the extra handling of measuring fish with. There's been a lot of measuring discussion in the musky world. Should you do it? Should you not do it? Some people they want to measure every single fish they catch. Some people could care less. I'm very much so in the middle once again. I personally, like I said, I don't want to measure a fish or risk the fish as I'm laying it down the board, flopping, getting out of my hands. The more time that you're holding the fish, the more time that you're going to have the opportunity to do damage to the fish. So if I can eliminate that 3 to 5 seconds or 10 seconds on the bump board and just get 1 quick, 2, 3 quick pictures, put the fish back, that's what I want to do personally, right? Another thing I think that's really interesting we need to focus more on is if once we net a fish, is a fish upside down in the net, making sure that fish is turned over, they're upright. How much damage does that do on a fish, or what is the scenarios with that? I've always been very prone to try and keep that fish upright at all times. That's always my biggest thing, is making sure a fish is upright, making sure they're breathing, making sure the net isn't packed in around their gills or there's nothing impeding on how they can breathe. Is very, very important. One thing that happens in musky fishing is what I call getting hung high in the net. When you scoop a fish, the hooks from the bait kind of hang the fish high up in the hoop of the net, and when you lay the hoop down on the side of the boat, the fish's head is out of the water. My first thing is to make sure that fish's head gets down in the water. This is before a high five, this is before a hug, this is before a hoot and holler. This is my first priority, is going to be unhook that fish, get that fish's head down in the water, and then go from there, right? So that they can be in their normal state as much as possible, right? So that's something I think that's really, really important with fish handling. One thing that I'm really curious about that I'd love to see more studies on is when we catch these fish out over deep open water basins, I see a lot of fish, and maybe it's just because I'm generally fishing shallow, that once you release them, they go down and they sit on the bottom to recover. Now, is it better to release a fish that is in, say, 10 feet of water or less? Do you want to release them in that depth so that they can go down there and sit in the bottom and recover? Or if you catch a fish over 80 feet of water, do you want to release it over 80 feet of water? Would that fish have a better chance if you could bring it into a shallower cover, per se, or place to rest or recover? Now, problem with that is that the fish is probably going to be, you're going to be handling the fish more, or the fish is going to be in the net while you're dragging it to the spot, or you're going to put it in your live well to get it to the spot. I'm very curious on that, or if that has any effect on it, on how these fish do as far as how they release. I think is very interesting, or was something that I'd like to know more about personally. What else do I got here? Just overall, like I said, I kind of got off on a tangent here with some fish handling stuff, but all this stuff, we just need to talk about. We can't be scared to talk about it. I know I've been super hesitant to talk about it myself, like I mentioned earlier in this video. I don't know if I'm going to sleep any better at night, but I think I am, just due to the fact I kind of got this off my chest. Hopefully you guys can talk about it. Like I say, I want this to be a civil conversation. I don't want this to be anyone going after anybody. We need to work together as a muskie community. We're a very small group of anglers. We have a fish that is very special to us, obviously, a fish that's very sought after, but also something that we need help with in a lot of our fisheries, with stocking, with muskie clubs, with the DNR itself. So I don't want this to be a shot at anybody. I only want this to be positive stuff, positive conversations we can learn from, and just start to get more people talking about the topic as a whole. I think is very, very important. Watch informational videos on it. I suggest if you haven't seen the Aaron videos, to go watch those. You can take it how you want. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. I basically looked at it as it was very interesting to me. I learned a lot from it. I saw that a lot of the larger fish struggled a lot more so than the smaller fish. And the one fish that Aaron did have was he had to handle a little bit longer due to the fact he had to go grab a camera that was 15 or 20 feet away. And that fish actually struggled. But the bigger fish are the ones that we always generally seem to have in our possession longer, which is something that we need to be very careful with, maybe, or look into that more, is should we be, have more of an urgency with a bigger fish than a smaller fish, even though the bigger fish, we're going to want to get a good measurement of it, maybe a girth measurement, maybe perfect pictures or this, that, or the other. I'm trying to push the envelope here and see if we can get more, we'll just say, I want to learn more about the fish as a whole. I want to learn more about what makes them do what they do, understand why they do what they do, and I want to get some facts and actual scientific data behind it so that we as anglers know what we're doing, if we're doing good things or bad things for the fish. And like I said, guys, a lot of this is just going to come down to just self-policing and making sure that you're not doing anything that's going to damage the fishery for someone else or someone else's kid, or for generations to come down the road, right? There's so much to this. These fish are so fragile and they take so long to get to our desired size. They grow so slow. I would love to see more stocking efforts. I would love to see more people get into muskie clubs. I'd love to see more donations as far as giving back to your local fisheries or muskie clubs to help with stocking or research or any of that stuff to just better our muskie fishing as a whole. So I think we need to work together. And like I said, guys, I hope this stays pretty civil in the comment section. I don't want anyone going after anyone. If it gets too bad to a point, I'm just going to delete this whole thing. And I don't want any of that negativity on here. I just want a lot of open conversations. I want people to be able to talk about it civilly. And maybe we have future talks on this. Maybe we kind of let this go and see what happens. But I wanted to do this. It was something I wanted to do with a couple other anglers. I had some people that were really very much so willing to do it. I had some people that didn't want to do it at all. And I understand why. It's a very controversial topic and something that can be very scary in our personal worlds, as far as if you are in the muskie industry or have a name or reputation or whatever it is. It's very interesting. So I had to get this off my chest. I personally feel better about it now. I hope you guys start to talk about the whole topic or subject as a whole. I feel like there's been very little information or talks of this so far, and the ones that are out there are extremely biased. I wanted to come at a more neutral feeling, which is where I personally feel my intent in this video is not to tell you guys how to do anything. My intent with this video was to tell you how I'm going to go and do things, I think, in the future going forward. There's a lot of things that I still have questions on. There's a lot of things that I think we all should have questions on for the muskies and muskie industry and our fish themselves. So I hope you guys take this with an open mind. I hope you guys think about it, talk about it, and just start to get a conversation going so that we can make sure that we have muskies in all of our lakes that have them currently, and we're not going to be doing any significant damage to these fish. And again, guys, it just comes down to self-policing and respecting the resource for other anglers and other people out there as well. So thank you guys for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, and if you have anything specifically you'd like to say, you can shoot a message to me directly. I'll do my best to get back to it. I'm getting into my busiest time of the year here with opener here tomorrow. Or please keep it clean down in the comments, like I said, and I'll kind of look at those here and there if I have the opportunity and get back to people. And maybe it's going to require another video, maybe not, we'll see. But thank you guys again, and tight lines out there.